Hi, I'm Jeffrey Smith, and I'm the founding director of the Institute for Responsible Technology. I've been working on genetically engineered foods for about 18 years, and one of the things that I do is I speak to medical conferences around the United States and around the world around the year. And I can tell you that there are thousands of doctors now telling their patients to avoid eating genetically modified foods. They're saying, do not eat foods that contain these genetically modified soy, corn, cottonseed oil, canola oil, sugar from sugar beets, as well as papaya from Hawaii, little zucchini, crookneck squash. These are the 8 major genetically modified foods, plus alfalfa, which is used as animal feed. Now, why would the doctors say don't eat GMOs? And moreover, why would they tell us that when they tell their patients to avoid eating GMOs, the patients report getting better from a variety of diseases and disorders? And it's not just telling the doctors. I actually have had the honor of asking more people individually what symptoms have gone away or improved when switching to a non-GMO diet. And maybe I've heard from thousands of people, and gastrointestinal is the main one, as well as weight problems and energy and brain fog and allergies and asthma and autoimmune disease and other immune system problems, headaches, including migraines. A whole host of diseases, a widespread range of diseases are reported by people and their physicians as being improved or eliminated on a non-GMO diet. And already 40% of Americans say they're avoiding or reducing GMOs. So those of you who do not even know what a GMO is, you probably want to know today. So to give a background as to how we got here, and we'll talk more about the dangers, GMO means genetically modified organism. You take a gene from one species and you force it into the DNA of other species. And you can typically insert genes from bacteria into these plants. And the design, the major reason they genetically engineer is so that the plants don't die when sprayed with herbicide. So you have Roundup Ready, soy, corn, cotton, canola, and alfalfa. Roundup Ready from Monsanto, those are the seeds, genetically engineered so that the crops can be sprayed with Roundup herbicide. Roundup herbicide would normally kill those crops, but not if they're genetically engineered to be herbicide tolerant. So the crops are sprayed with Roundup. Roundup gets absorbed into the food. We eat the crops. We eat the herbicide. That's bad. Two other crops, corn and cotton, are engineered to produce their own toxic insecticide called Bt toxin that breaks open little holes in the stomach walls of insects to kill them. Well, we're eating an insecticide when we eat the corn products. That's also bad. But even the process itself of genetic engineering, the process of inserting the gene, cloning the cell into a plant, that can create massive collateral damage. 2 to 4% of the plant's DNA can be different, mostly through mutations, hundreds or thousands of them. And so you can have higher levels of an existing allergen, like is in Monsanto's soy, introduce a completely new allergen accidentally with Monsanto's corn. Monsanto's the big GMO company. And these kind of background changes, this massive collateral damage, was identified by the scientists working at the FDA. And back in 1991 and 92, they said, okay, look at GMOs and tell us what you think so we can create a policy. We now have those documents because of a lawsuit. We didn't have them then, but years later, we now know that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA were that GMOs were dangerous and could lead to allergies, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. They urged their superiors to require long-term study, but the person in charge of policy was Monsanto's former attorney, Michael Taylor, later Monsanto's vice president and chief lobbyist, now back at the FDA as U.S. food safety czar. When Taylor was in charge of policy at the FDA, that's when the GMO policy came out, and it broadly stated, falsely, that the agency wasn't aware of any information showing that GMOs were significantly different. Based on that complete lie, which was a complete opposition of what we now know to have taken place in the FDA among its own scientists, on the basis of that lie, the FDA said, no safety studies needed, no labeling needed. Monsanto, who told us that Agent Orange and DDT and PCBs were safe and got that wrong, they can determine whether GMOs are safe, and we'll trust them this time. So this was putting the fox guarding the henhouse. And now, years later, the scientists at the FDA have been vindicated. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine reviewed the animal feeding studies in 2009 and said these animals are suffering from gastrointestinal problems, immune system problems, organ damage, accelerated aging, reproductive problems, problems with cholesterol and insulin regulation. If this list sounds a little bit familiar, many of these categories were what we described as the reports of individuals getting better from these things when they get off of GMOs. So the same symptoms and disorders found in lab animals, force-fed GMOs in laboratories, are being relieved in humans when they get rid of GMOs in their diet. Now, when humans get rid of GMOs because they're not labeled, they have to do a strategy. They have to buy organic, switch to unprocessed foods or less processed foods. We have a website, non-GMOshoppingguide.com. It's free. You can look at over 20,000 products verified as non-GMO. If you have an iPhone or an iPad, download Shop No GMO, also free, which gives the list of the non-GMO project verified products. And when people get rid of GMOs, because they may be switching to organic or reducing processed foods, you don't really know if the improvements in their health are based on just eliminating GMOs or switching to the more healthy organic, etc. However, when the livestock switch from GM corn or GM soy to non-GM corn or soy, and they get better from the same disorders and diseases as the lab animals under controlled conditions, as the humans, same as the pets when switched to non-GMO pet food, that gives us more confidence that GMOs are at least a major culprit. Then if we look at the incidence of these diseases and compare them to the rise in the use of GMOs and also Roundup herbicide, which is coupled closely with most GMOs and sprayed on the crops, the slope of increase is dramatically close. And I'm talking about many different diseases. Now, that's correlation. It doesn't mean that there's causation if the two rise together. But if there is causation, and we think there is, then this is further evidence to support it. So just let me name you some of those charts that we see as closely correlated with the increased use of GMOs and Roundup. All the gastrointestinal disorders that are major: inflammatory bowel, irritable bowel, chronic constipation, acid reflux, etc. Then we have certain types of cancers of the normal organs that are disrupted in the lab animals fed GMOs: liver, kidneys, bladder, bile duct. Then we have deaths from senile dementia, stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. There's autism, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes. That's incredibly close connection if you look at that slope. Now, if you think about all of these different diseases, how could it be that GMOs might create all of these different problems? We don't know for sure because a lot of the science has been suppressed. Scientists who discover problems are often fired, attacked, threatened, gagged. We've documented that for years. It's even written up in Nature magazine as one of the knee-jerk reactions of the biotech industry trying to suppress evidence. But if you look at what we do know from the research that we have, the very process of genetic engineering might support widespread diseases. But then you have these two main toxins I just talked about. You have the Roundup. Now the Roundup and its active ingredient, they're linked to cancer. They're linked to endocrine disruptions. They're linked to gut bacteria problems, which can cause, and digestive problems, and they're linked to the disabling the ability of the liver to detoxify other toxins, the disability of the gut bacteria to produce L-tryptophan, which is linked to serotonin, which is very important for our mood and behavior and for insulin production. It's linked to creating chelation or binding with minerals, making minerals unavailable to us, which is pretty critical. So if you look just at Roundup and its active ingredient, two studies recently linked it to cancer, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, anorexia, aggression, depression, gluten sensitivity, and kidney failure, among others. And that's not the complete exhaustive list. There was also digestive problems and reproductive problems, etc., added on top of that. So that's one way that we may be getting all these different diseases and why doctors are prescribing non-GMO diets, because of the Roundup that we're eating in Roundup-ready crops. Then you have the Bt toxin, that's the insecticide that's created inside corn that breaks open little holes in the stomach walls of insects to kill them. Turns out it breaks open little holes in human cells as well. So we may be getting holes along our digestive tract. Leaky gut is linked to a lot of diseases: cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune disease, autism, some of the ones we've already discussed. and it might also cause gastrointestinal disorders. Bt toxin is linked to immune system problems. The key point here is this. If you look at the two main toxins that they found that they either produce in GMOs or add to GMOs, they could explain logically why all of these diseases and disorders may be linked and caused or exacerbated by GMO consumption, and why the doctors are prescribing non-GMO diets and say that people get better from them. You can find more details at responsibletechnology.org. Now, shouldn't we have the right to choose not to eat GMOs? Well, I personally think there is sufficient evidence to ban GMOs. But you see, the administration, the Obama administration and previous administrations have been marching lockstep with Monsanto and the biotech industry, promoting their agenda, ignoring the research, unfortunately. And there's been kind of this corporate takeover and revolving door in the EPA and FDA and USDA and Trade Office and Agency for International Development. All these things have Monsanto's people or biotech people in there running the show. So ideally, we should be able to choose not to eat GMOs if the government is still allowing them on the market. 64 other countries allow labeling of GMOs, but not the United States, because the FDA is told they're mandated by this and previous administrations promote GMOs. So the company or the regulatory agency that's supposed to regulate GMOs and keep them safe is also tasked with promoting GMOs. That's some conflict of interest. Now, states have taken up the battle to label GMOs. It passed in Vermont. Conditional labeling laws passed in Connecticut and Maine. And of course, Oregon voters have a chance in 2014 to pass a meaningful regulation for mandatory labeling. So obviously, we're in favor of giving people the chance to follow the doctor's advice. And these days, when I go and speak at a large lecture and there's 40 people or 50 people in the audience that say they've avoided GMOs or are significantly removing them from their diet, I would expect that 90% or so have noticed significant health improvements after making the switch. I can pretty much guess what percentage would be in these various categories. It is so predictable. I even tell audiences, watch this. I'm going to tell you about how many people respond to these particular symptoms. I did this the other day in California. There was about 100 people in the audience that had been removing GMOs. It was exactly as predicted. And the doctors are now so confident in the effects of removing GMOs. Some are saying, yes, it'll take about this many days for immune system problems, this many days for mental issues like anxiety and depression, these many days for gastrointestinal, because they are removing GMOs from the diets of thousands of patients, experimenting on us, and then seeing the results. So the key takeaway here is this. You can find out a lot more about GMOs and get all this stuff by going to responsibletechnology.org. The film that we have is called Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives at geneticroulettemovie.com. That gives the whole story. Most people see the movie get to the cupboard stage. They get back and they start removing products from their cupboard. People tell me all the time, saw your movie, changed the diet, I feel better. My 6.5-year-old who was violent and out of control and they wanted to kick him out of school, all the problems disappeared. My other child, ADHD. I hear all these stories all the time. So watch the movie Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, change your diet, and tell others. Tell others about this. Because what's happening is as people start removing GMOs from their cupboard and their shopping list, it's putting economic pressure on the food companies. So we've tipped the tipping point against GMOs in the natural products industry, and now we think with this continued pressure and demand for non-GMO labeled products, as long as it's not required to be labeled as GMO, there's over 20,000 products that are voluntarily labeling themselves as non-GMO. They're expanding sales dramatically. We do a little more effort in that direction, and we'll tip GMOs right out of the marketplace with or without support from the government. So we can do this. We have the power. It was a tipping point of consumer rejection that kicked GMOs out of Europe 15 years ago, kicked a genetically engineered bovine growth hormone out of Walmart and most dairies about 6 years ago or 7 years ago. We can kick GMOs out too, just by making choices that are better for our health and especially our children who are most at risk. Safe eating. responsibletechnology.org, non-GMOshoppingguide.com, geneticroulettemovie.com, and finally the iPhone app Shop No GMO.